Let me read a passage to you guys. This is a section called Storytime with Artham. Let me see if I can find it. It's tricky because there's 99 chapters or whatever. Let me find it. People have asked me before why I do such short chapters in the books, and it's because I really wanted these books to be read aloud as a family. And as a family, we have read, when the kids were young especially, we read a lot of books aloud. And man, there's nothing as like that'll discourage you from reading aloud as a family, like looking to see that there's 30 more pages left in the chapter of the Council of Elrond. And so I just really I liked the idea that you could like squeeze it in little 30-minute sessions with your kids at home, and so that's why. And part of my game, a lot of times I'll write the chapters, and then the chapters are longer in the first draft than they are in the actual book. So I'll go through and I'll find the best cliffhanger, and I cut off the chapter there and then divide it into two. So you're welcome. And then sorry, I've got trying to find Morning Challenger. You found it. Thank you. Page 208. This is a chapter called Storytime with Artham. This happens in Dugtown in Scree, and it's when Artham Wingfeather has kind of, for the moment, come back to himself, and he's sitting there with Artham and The Bard. Do we have an Artham and The Bard here? Would you stand up? Welcome, Artham and The Bard, yeah. Are there others? Is anybody else brave enough to do Artham and The Bard? There's one way back there. How's it going, man? And then I think you probably know this by now, but Artham and The Bard was loosely based on Rich Mullins. So if you, one of my favorite songwriters, and so R. Mullen the Bard, and he's barefoot in the books, as was Rich, and I think he may have smelled funny in the books too, which I heard was true of Rich. So Artham is telling Artham and the Bard about the Shining Isle of Anira. And so he's sitting there, and there's a bunch of orphans around, and he's describing what the island is like to someone who's always dreamed of going there. Sarah sat on the cobbles with Artham and Artham and the Bard. The orphans, most of whom were asleep, were gathered around as if it were story time. And story time it was. Artham and the Bard seemed to have grown 10 years younger in Artham P. Wingfeather's presence, and was sitting cross-legged in front of him, asking every question he could think of about the Shining Isle. Artham indulged him, laughing at the Bard's delight over the tiniest details. Sarah widened her eyes at merrily. Do we have any Sarah Cobblers here? Would you stand up if you're a Sarah Cobbler? Hi, Sarah Cobblers. You guys are awesome. Which, by the way, Sarah was a total surprise to me. She came because in the first draft of the book, my editor in Colorado said that the first chapter where Janner is laying in bed and listening to the black carriage kind of rumble through the dark, she said that chapter needs to be a little more menacing, draw it out a little bit, maybe have Janner remember someone who he knew who was taken by the carriage. So just kind of offhand, I was like, I don't know, Sarah Cobbler sounds like a good name, and I wrote about Sarah Cobbler. And then it wasn't until Northrop B. Eaton, when Janner appeared in the Fork Factory and he saw someone, I was like, oh, I know exactly who that is. So, okay, so Sarah widened her eyes at Merrily and pointed secretly at Artham. Are there any Merrilies here? I am going to get through the chapter. Any Merrilies? Stand up if will you stand up so we can see you? Yay, that's good. Anybody else? Okay. Can you believe it, she said? After all this time, this was the Artham Sarah had been looking for. When he had arrived at the Fork Factory, he spoke with a strong, clear voice, and his eyes were brave and kind. Even with his wings and reddish skin, he was somehow handsome. But ever since that day, Artham had lost himself. Sarah was glad he was back. She scooted over to make room for Merrily. They sat under the steady glow of the torch towers and listened. Yes, Artham said. There are mountains, but mostly in the center of the island. As the land slopes down to the sea, the hills roll out like a floor of green pillows. Are the mountains snowy in the winter, like it says in Legend of Ehrman the Brave? Snowy, yes. And when they catch the light at sunrise, they blush like maidens. Tell me about the towns. Are there many? Most of the stories are about Risen. The towns are perfect. What do you mean? Well, let me put it like this. Imagine you're walking one of the footpaths that cut through the countryside. You have a staff and a rucksack, and after a few brisk hours, you think to yourself, I could use a hearty bowl of limpany stew about right now. The villages in Anira are so perfectly spaced that as soon as you have that thought, you crest a hill and see a village in the valley below, with smoke in the chimneys and the smell of hay on the wind. You stroll into town, and after some bibes from the village fount, every village has a fount for travelers, you turn around and you see a little inn or a tavern, likely next to an apparelry or a bookstore. There are bookstores in every town. It's a requirement, you see. Armelin sighed. You stride into that inn and you lean your walking stick by the door, and no sooner than you've sat down and sipped a pint of something warm, the proprietor brings you a bowl of limpany stew. But how does he know? They always have what you want in Anira. Armelin looked skeptical, but Artham continued, it's not that the cooks are magic, it's the land, you see. When you're walking through that part of the island, the shape of the hills, the color of the leaves, the way the light hits the tree trunks, the cool of the morning, and the smell of crops, probably limpany sprouts, all contrive to make you want exactly the right thing at the right time. Well, I've never heard of limpany stew, said Armelin, but I want some. And the same is true of the cooks, I suppose. I mean, they would wake up that morning with limpany stew on the brain? Yes, of course. They make a variety of things. Not every traveler wants the same thing at the same time. But when they walk through the door, the proprietor can usually tell by the look of them what they'll need. The people of the Shining Isle are attentive to the way the Maker shaped the world. But it's not just that. They're also attentive to the way the Maker made the heart. And they're just trying to be good subjects, trying to give each other what they were made to give. So, in Anira, what you want and what you need, Armelin said, are one and the same. Exactly. That's what the Maker intended from the beginning, Artham said. It's not always so, but on the best days, that's how it feels. If the kingdom hadn't fallen apart in the first epic, thanks to Ouster Will, I think it would still be that way the world over. As they say, if the weather's bad, it's Ouster Will. Ouster Will, he breathes on your ankles beneath your bed, Armelin chanted. Waits till you're sleeping and sneaks in your head. Borley shivered and scooted closer to Sarah. I haven't heard that in a while, Artham said. So, Ouster Will, he was real too? Armelin said with a shake of his head. The world is more terrible and more wonderful than I imagined. I've had that song stuck in my head since I first learned it at the Whistle Harp Academy. He darkens your dreams till you wish you were dead, under the ground on the graveyard hill with Ouster Will, Ouster Will. Borley shivered again, and this time the bard shivered too. I'm surprised that you know it, Artham said. Oh, I know everything about Anira. Armelin's eyes twinkled, and he suddenly looked like a little boy. Well, everything you can know without actually going there. I've dreamed of it since I was young. My parents told me about it, fed me a steady supply of books, and once I learned about the Aniran songs, I dedicated my life to keeping them alive here in Scree. Especially after the Great War, the songs seemed to wake up something hopeful in the Screeans, and the Fangs absolutely hate them. Armelin thought for a moment, then asked, after my limpany stew at the village tavern, would I stay the night? No, it's only midday, remember? You'd pay the owner and strike out over green fields of potato and fatra in bloom. You wouldn't need a map, for there are signposts exactly when you need them. And as soon as you were hungry for supper, you'd come upon another village, another fount, another bookstore, and another tavern. You might even be invited in to stay with a farmer for the night. I want to go there, Queen Sarah, Borley said with a yawn. Can we? Sarah squeezed Borley. Anira's on the other side of the ocean, dear. Our home is here in Scree. We don't really have a home anywhere. Borley pointed at the orphans spread across the cobbles of the marketplace like a garden of sleeping children. Don't worry, Sarah said. When this is over, we'll make a home here. Anira does sound nice, said another voice. Gretelin was awake a few feet away. My ma used to tell me stories about it when I was a baby. What kind of stories? Said another voice as small as a mouse. A girl Sarah didn't know sat up and propped herself on her elbows. The same as I told you on the way here, Lola, Armelin said gently. Remember? Yes, I remember, but I still like to hear them. Me too, Artham said. He stared up at the flames roiling on the torch tower and sighed. It's a lovely place for a traveler, for the whole land feels like home. Why, if you brought your whistle harp, Armelin, you'd never want for a meal or a bed. Anirans treasure music like no one else. And what of the castle? Armelin asked. Sarah and Merrily glanced at one another, then at Artham, who was still staring at the fire. The castle? Artham closed his eyes. It's beautiful. It looks like it grew straight out of the stone itself. Spires, flags flapping in the east wind, smoke rising out from the chimneys, and children laughing in the courts. It's a beautiful place. A beautiful place. How I song to Liet again. Armelin gave Sarah a confused look. Maybe we should change the subject, Sarah suggested. Artham bobbed his head to and fro and clapped his reddish hands. The claws clacked together oddly. The king would dimply see delighted to have you, Patoo, too, too. He grinned and wiped a tear from his cheek. He's my brother, you know. The shing of the Kining Isle. Shing, shing, shing. What's happening, Armelin said. A few of the children sat up and looked afraid. Shh, said merrily, scooting over to Artham and stroking his arm. It's all right, sir. But I left him, Armelin whimpered. He laid his head in Merrily's lap. And now he's dead. I was the throne warden, you know. Sarah tilted his head back and gave him a drink of water. You're still a throne warden. All right. Thank you very much.